10, weil die oben im Kämmerchen sitzen? Ja, ja, keine Ruhe. Das klingt gut. So, jetzt der Matti aus Saal 3. Was kann ich euch Gutes tun? Ja, Signal liegt an. Ich habe nur ein bisschen Glück gehabt.
Yeah, yesterday you made a presentation. You're very interesting.
Ich war super kreativ, Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the final morning of the ITF Summit. My name is Victoria Sheehan. I am the Executive Director for the Transportation Research Board. The Transportation Research Board is an American organization primarily focused on advancing the research needs of the transportation community in the United States. However, we work with a number of global partners and we encourage international participation in our work, and that's why I'm proud to be here today to introduce this research spotlight. This morning's session was organized jointly between the ITF Secretariat, together with the European Commission, the European Conference of Transport Research Institutes, the Transportation Research Board, and the World Conference on Transportation Research. Tuesday's plenary focused on transportation as an enabler of sustainable economies, peace and stability. And the plenary following this session will dig a little deeper on that topic and specifically focus on transportation and how it enhances economic growth. But this morning we're going to talk specifically about cities and logistics and how critical the work is of urban logistics planners to ensure our systems are integrated appropriately. We have a wonderful panel, and so welcome to all of our distinguished delegates, our researchers, the policymakers, and the practitioners who are here today. The format for today's session, I'm going to introduce the panelists one by one. They'll come up and speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of opportunity for questions and discussion in the final phase of our presentation. And so to set the stage, let me just introduce the topic. Urban logistics, as I said, is critical to a thriving economy. But in spite of this, urban freight transportation often receives lower policy attention than passenger transportation activities. And in fact, I think this session is the only session this week focused specifically on freight transportation. And so we are going to highlight and provide research insights for policymakers on how to plan more sustainable logistics while ensuring that systems also provide for efficient gains for logistics centers and carriers. We're going to touch on governance frameworks for logistic planning, innovation, and policy schemas that can allow for more efficient and sustainable logistics. And we're also going to talk about some of the challenges for making urban logistics contribute to a more circular economy. And so with that, we're going to kick things off with our first speaker. I'm pleased to introduce Carolina Isaksson, who is a professor at the Swedish National Road and Transport Research Institute, VTI, and an adjunct professor at the Department of Urban and Regional Studies at KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. Her research focuses on governance, politics, and power that shape the possibilities to integrate climate goals and broader sustainability perspectives in land use and transportation planning. She has published several works exploring initiatives for sustainable mobility and climate mitigation in local, regional, and national policy and planning. So please join me in welcoming Carolina.
Thank you for that. Good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to be here today, and I've already been introduced so nicely. So I will start at once with my talk. Yeah, it's already there, thank you. Building transformative capacity in strategic transport planning. And this presentation builds on research that I've been carrying out together with colleagues at VTI and KTH as part of a research program called MISTRA SAMS, Sustainable Mobility and Accessibility Services, which you can read more about in some leaflets that I've spread around at the Congress. I want to say that I'm aware that this spotlight session is focused on urban logistics, but my talk here will give a slightly broader approach. My presentation is focused on wider policy and governance issues related to climate mitigation and sustainable transport planning. But of course, this has a bearing on logistics too. I want to click. Yeah. I would like to start with this quotation. This is one of the repeated messages from the IPCC. And what they say, based upon a lot of research, of course, is basically that meeting climate goals requires transformative change for the whole society and for the transport sector. And it has been very clear from the IPCC reports over the last years that we cannot rely only on technological innovation if we want to meet climate and other sustainability targets in a robust manner. We also need to reduce the overall transport demand. We need to think smarter about transport and rethink many things. We know that for a long time, I think, and there are many pedagogic frameworks that has helped us to understand the possible ways forward to work in such a direction. For instance, this one, I think you recognize that. I've heard it mentioned the days here at the summit, the Avoid, Shift, Improve framework. It's an example of a quite straightforward way to communicate that we need to work with different types of measures. We need to improve existing transport modes, of course, by means of technological innovation, greener fuels, and so on. But we also need to shift from energy-intensive to less energy-intensive, active modes of transport. We also sometimes need to avoid transport, reduce transport demand, for instance, by creating more efficient logistics chains, perhaps replacing some mobility with virtual connectivity when possible. And it's also about how we plan and organize our cities and communities in ways that makes us less car dependent. And I've been working for many years in transport policy research within the Northern European context. And over these years, many important things have happened that support a shift to more sustainable transport, especially in cities, I would say. But I must also say that the larger picture is that we have not yet challenged the idea of ever-increasing transport flows. We are still not focusing enough on managing demand. So the main policy problem that I've been thinking of, together with my colleagues, is that transport policy still relies heavily on a belief in technological innovation in a time when we know that there is also need to manage demand and explore ways for securing access with less traffic. And in relation to what we know today about the need for a wider transformation, it's obvious that we need to develop broader transformative capacity in transport policy and planning. And transformative capacity can be defined as, and I'm now citing the transition scholar Vanessa Castambroto, the ability to develop processes and institutions to drive radical change towards more sustainable futures. But what can then such transformative capacity be about in a transport planning context? That was the question that I and my colleagues wanted to explore. And in the study that I will talk about, we carried out research with a focus on a unique initiative in strategic transport planning. It was carried out in the Swedish context. It was a couple of years ago. The government commissioned 6 national authorities to get together and develop a roadmap for how to make the Swedish transport system fossil-free. And this government commission was quite unique. So this is not the way things are maybe normally done in our context. So it's not a representative example, but I think it's an interesting example, because it led to a large degree of unity among the organizations involved, even though they work with quite different fields of expertise like energy, housing, transport policy, environment and energy. And the final results, the roadmap they produced, also contain quite unique ways of combining policy measures. For instance, they combined policy measures, or they suggested combinations of working both with logistics, personal mobility, new ways of measuring impact and potential for climate mitigation, new ways of thinking about how to prioritize among possible measures, and perhaps most importantly, there was agreement on the need to manage demand and reduce the share of energy-intensive means of transport. So therefore, we think of this as a quite transformative-oriented initiative that can tell us something, perhaps, about transformative capacity. I can't go much into the details, or not much more than that, really, but I will present for you some of the key takeaways or things that proved important in this initiative. So first of all, the existence of a clear and bold mission, of course, but without any detailed steering from the government. There was space for the authorities to themselves make decisions and priorities according to their expertise. Secondly, the combination of expertise from different fields as a clear sign that the transformation of the transport system doesn't only require knowledge about transport and infrastructure, but also environment, social justice, energy, housing, land use planning. Then there was also some more specific things that happened in the process that were important. For instance, the authority in charge of this commission, the Energy Agency, made sure to put a lot of time and energy into building trust, allowing time to share experiences of problems and challenges, and so on. So they really made sure to build a common ground for their common work. The organizations could also agree on specific things that needed to change in their own work procedures if they were to succeed with a joint task. For instance, it soon became clear that the otherwise very commonly applied method of economic appraisal in transport planning wasn't really fit for the purpose of identifying and selecting measures for climate transformation. Many of the policy measures had impacts that were not easy to isolate the effects of. They might have limited impacts on their own, but could have a stronger potential if combined with other measures, etc. So the agencies agreed on a more qualitatively oriented, but still well-structured way of working with a focus on impact chains, rather than seeking exact impact relations between isolated factors. So they developed joint principles and practices of working, analyzing, and prioritizing. It was also important that they allowed a more stepwise approach and learning by doing, so they allowed also some uncertainty in the policy measures they identified as relevant. The final reflections and policy implications from this process, I think. First of all, there are opportunities to develop policy strategies that build on all three principles of avoid, shift, and improve. This was what happened in this process. And secondly, there is obviously a lot of experience and knowledge and creativity around within public organizations that can be used better if we allow for it to happen. We've also learned from this process the importance of feeding back results of specific assignments like this one to the more regular organizational procedures, decision-making processes, planning, etc. It's not enough, of course, to produce a roadmap. It also has to be implemented into the established ways of working. And unfortunately, this was one of the more weaker things about this commission. Finally, perhaps the most obvious one, but still, there's really a need for clear political ambitions, both to initiate these types of initiatives, but also to take the results further into implementation. I will stop there, so thank you.
So thank you, Carolina, for your insights. I think you articulated it well. We have a bold mission within the transportation sector that will require us to work with perhaps some non-traditional partners and think more about how we can integrate both land use and transportation planning if we truly are going to be successful. And I appreciate the emphasis on the need to build trust amongst those different stakeholders, not just to develop roadmaps, but actually to bring about change and actually conduct the implementation work. So thank you. I'd like to introduce now two colleagues who will be presenting on our next topic. First of all, we have Andre Alcala, who is a Colombian economist who graduated from Los Andes University in Bogota, Colombia, with a magister degree in economics from the same university and a Master of Arts degree in transportation economics from Leeds University at the UK. Mr. Alcala has over 20 years of experience in transportation planning, involving both public and private sector work. He began his career in the regulatory entity of Ports and Transport in Colombia, and then worked as a project manager for a Spanish consultancy firm, where his last position was General Director of the Colombian branch in Bogota. Since 2013, he has worked for CAF, which is the Development Bank of Latin America, as a specialist in urban transportation and mobility, and as part of the sustainable habitat and urban mobility work that they undertake. He currently coordinates the LOGOS project, which is a strategy for sustainable and safe city logistics, as well as working on electric mobility strategies at CAF. And then his colleague is Ignacy Ragas, who is an independent consultant. He also is an economist specializing in transport logistics and economic development with over 37 years of experience. He worked in the Barcelona City Council in the 90s and into the early 2000s at the Mayor's Office and in the Secretariat for Economic Development. He was also the general manager of Cimalsa from 2004 till 2011. Catalonia's government undertaking involved the development and operations of logistics for parks and freight transportation infrastructure. So he brings a number of years of experience. He's worked in over 30 countries, including significant work in Spain, and city logistics is one of his key areas of expertise. So please join me in welcoming our next panelists.
Yes. Good morning to everybody. I am Ragas. He is Alcalá. So I'm starting first. So first of all, thank you for inviting us to this conference, to this ITF summit. We'll talk about urban logistics, city logistics. We'll talk about freight. I may say, well, at last we have spent 2 days, and I've heard quite little about freight, mostly about passengers, but quite little about freight. That's good news that we start about that. Why freight? Why city logistics? Because it is relevant everywhere. It was more visible during the COVID pandemic, when urban logistics systems ensured, supplied all shops, all companies during our lockdowns, making life bearable. Remember that. And why in Latin America? Because Latin America is one of the most urbanized regions in the world. About 80% of population lives in cities. That's important. And in Latin America, as everywhere, we see logistics systems, logistics practice becoming more complex. We see more deliveries, more often, more complex, impacting on cities in terms of pollution, congestion, noise, consumption of urban space, with implications on planning, as our prior speaker has also mentioned. And it's becoming a concern from populations. But on the other hand, it is essential for urban life, as mentioned before, and it is important for jobs. It is important for business. And this is absolutely relevant in developing countries as in Latin America. However, unfortunately, it is almost absent from policy agendas, policy dialogues, almost absent from strategies from development partners, from their investment portfolios. And this is the context, unfortunately, in this moment. What's LOGOS? LOGOS is a strategy to provide cities with tools to governance, to govern, to manage, to understand, to raise projects, to prepare projects on urban logistics. It has almost, I would say, 4 aims. First, raise awareness. You need to include urban freight in the same equation as personal mobility to make meaningful policies, to make meaningful mobility plans. Second, you need to provide decision makers, officials in cities with conceptual frameworks. What can be done in terms of governance, in terms of planning, in terms of regulations, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of cooperation, and in terms of innovation. Third, you need to provide, and Logos provides cities with tools to raise knowledge, to understand the problems better, to help them make a diagnosis on where they stay, where can they go, and tools to help them to create implementation tools, to formulate meaningful projects and bankable projects. And last but not least, is to help them to provide an easy roadmap to help them get early wins on this process without obliging them to engage on expensive mobility plans, urban freight plans, just to get early wins from this process. This process was started in 2016 with a test pilot in Montevideo. Then we've worked in 9 more cities from Brazil, Argentina, Ecuador, Colombia, El Salvador. You've seen then in the map. That's the background of the Logos program. Now I'm giving the floor to Andres, who will provide you with more details on the Logos program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ignacio. Hello? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Ignacio. Thank you, everyone, for being here and joining us. Yeah, well, this work that was developed by the bank, it was financed by the bank. By the way, CAF is not the train company, it's the Development Bank of Latin America. It was delivered by mainly 3 types of tools that want to be very practical and useful for the governments, for the cities. And these tools are here shown as knowledge tools at the beginning. That includes a guide of lessons learned on good practices and diagnostics and monitoring tools as well, trying to get the data, the basic data. We are aware that there is a lack of data on freight transport, on urban logistics, but we were trying to put up the first seed on that. And mainly applications tools, probably the more important ones that we have developed in this work that we have done. This is one example of those application tools. Probably the most successful one in applying that one, that was the roadmap Logos. And what we did was just trying to identify the projects that were on each city that we were working with, and trying to put it on a framework, and also in a frame of the lines of work that we have developed within the strategy. So it was a very collaborative work with all the stakeholders that were involved on the development of this roadmap. The other one is probably more recent. It was developed in the second phase of the strategy of the program, that we called it a Logos Integral Plan. And we tried to get closer to the implementation phase and get closer to the possibilities of financing these type of interventions with an logistics infrastructure as a project, as an anchor of the whole package, but including as well another software or more soft interventions like in governance, in planning and monitoring, and regulations and enforcement, and in collaborative policies and innovation. All of that in a package will confirm a pilot or a program that can be delivered or financed by the bank or by any other bank, development bank, in order to advance in this issue. This is some of the outcomes that we have reached in all of these years of the implementation of the deployment of the strategy. I have just 3 examples. Those very nice examples. One is in Fortaleza, Brazil. It was a pilot of recyclable waste, the collection of recyclable waste. It was called Reciclo. It's a very nice project. If you have the chance to check it out on the website, it's really nice. And we have another one that was not developed by CAF directly, but it was one of the products that was identified on the roadmap that we did on Cordoba and Rosario. That was the low carbon action plans. And finally, the Arenal market in Cuenca, Ecuador, where the bank has an operation, a financial operation, and we try to add value on giving many other actions, complementary actions. You can find more information about Logos, the Logos Toolkit in the website. Unfortunately, it's only in Spanish, but it's a good excuse to learn the language for many of you. We're very proud that we are the first multilateral agency that is working in this kind of work in the region. And I think that now this urban logistics is firmly embedded in CAF's urban development and transportation agenda. The vision is of integral mobility as well. And finally, I want to share with you some lessons learned, some of them, but the most important ones, that it is true that Logos has raised awareness about urban logistics challenges in many cities in the region, but however, moving this topic up in decision makers' priorities is still a challenge. We have to work a little more on that. And there are more public and private dialogue cooperation that is still needed. You just pointed out in your presentation. Is really important. That also that policies catalog is too often based on experience from other regions, and we want to incentivize the exchange of information in this area on the countries and the cities that are working on these projects. And finally, the circular economy is still mostly absent from city logistics, and there is a good opportunity to set discussions and to set the spotlight and priorities on this issue in order to advance and to improve the urban logistics of our cities. I think with that, we will finish this presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. Logos is an important project. As you said, we need to not only raise awareness and ensure that our governments and planners understand the importance of urban logistics, but most importantly, we're also working on tools and helping cities in using data to make informed decisions. So great work. So let me introduce 2 more colleagues. First of all, we have Cesar Becerra, who is an anthropologist with over 20 years of research in fields like collaboration, marketing, value networks, sustainability, transport, supply chain, education, and innovation. He is currently the CEO of Logica Research Foundation and the director of the Center for Latin American Innovation, CLI, and created an alliance with the MIT Global Supply Chain and Logistics for Excellence. His colleague, Daniel Prato, is a research manager working with Logica and CLI, and he is a scientist and research manager focused on air quality. He's an environmental engineer by background with a master's in automotive engineering and a doctorate in engineering sciences. He has led projects financed by NGOs and the local and national authorities in Colombia, Mexico, and the United States over the last 10 years. His projects have been directly related to the use of technical and scientific knowledge to support public policy formation. So please join me in welcoming our next two presenters.
So, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm very glad to be here with you all. As you already said, we are going to share with you a little bit about our experience, talking particularly about Bogota, where we are from, in Colombia. And, well, we are going to talk about innovative solutions for last mile distribution in urban areas at an emerging economy like Colombian one. So, to get into the details right now, why last mile and what is last mile? You know, beyond the technical definition, that is the last mile. You see, a lot of people, taxis, particular cars, informal commerce, formal commerce, you know, just people walking around. So the definition for last mile for us in Logica is where we met all together. You know, it's where everything converges. It's where everything at the end happens from the logistical point of view. And that's why last mile is so important for us, you see? Because at the end, most of the costs, the logistical cost, comes from the last mile. So that's last mile. Thinking about a little bit about the local context, as you already know, and I told you, more than the 30% of the cost distributions comes in last mile, so it's an important issue for the companies that we work with and the government and everything. It's very important because, as you already know, the pandemics took a very big jump regarding what happens in last mile, because all of us wanted things at home, things at work, so that moves faster the last mile. Bogota, it's probably every year less and less congested. But anyway, we are still on the top 10, so that's another issue to consider. And, well, as you already know, freight transportation is responsible for the 38% of the emissions in the world. Now, that's the context, that's why last mile, and of course, what are the gaps that we are talking about on these projects are, of course, the assessment of the performance of vehicles, of electrical vehicles, the analysis of the impact of the use of batteries and what is going to happen with the batteries. That is an uncomfortable issue, but we need to address what is going to happen with the batteries as well. The comparison of the environmental impact, and as well, mainly talking about collaboration in the distribution models, how we can collaborate in last mile, okay? So our approach was actually collaborative. What we do in Logica is collaboration, so we try to face all the challenges with the collaborations tools, with the collaboration models, thinking about how we can share infrastructure, how we can reach the zero emission, how we can understand the new consumer, how we can research and educate more and more about these topics, how these converge as well about digital transformation and cultural behavior, you see? So that's like the main context. I'm going to give you the word, Daniel, to talk a little bit more about that and the figures, you know, about these projects.
Okay, thank you so much for the invitation to the ITF for us to present here. And here is the general results of the 3 pilots that we have implemented in Bogota. Not just regarding the use of zero-emission vehicles, but the logistic models that is being needed to implement a sustainable logistic operation in urban areas. So these 3 pilots, on these 3 pilots, we involved the participation of 15 companies We use 16 zero-emission vehicles between motorcycles, electric vans, e-cargo bikes, and e-cargo trikes. And there are several considerations in order to implement those models. For example, the commercial density of the area where we are going to operate, the infrastructure. Bogota is one of the cities that has more cycle infrastructure in order to use it for not just for transportation of passengers, but for cargo transportation. We need to consider the type of the product that we are going to deliver. We need to consider what is the proper type of the vehicle that we are going to use. And we have to say that still in Colombia, we don't have not that much diversity or offer of electric vehicles. So we use those that you are seeing in the photos. And we present or we work with two operational models. The first one is the company has a distribution center in the city, so you use the infrastructure in order to cargo the products and use the electrical vehicles. And the second one is a collaborative model that it's for companies that are operating in the surroundings of the city. So we built across the platform in a strategic point in the city, which is the one in green, where 4 or 5 companies work together in order to share the space, to use a truck in order to lift the product and then cargo on the zero-emission vehicles. And this was the more successful model when we share the use of the infrastructure. We can reduce the cost, and we in Last Mile talk about how to reduce the logistic cost, how to be more efficient with the operation, and that impact will allow us to reduce the air pollution, to reduce the impacts on mobility. And that's what we found at the end of these pilots. We reduced the emissions. We reduce the amount of the time that people or the drivers has to spend delivering the products, which means an improvement on their life quality. Just thinking that right now we have a lack of drivers, not just in the logistics, but in very wide sectors. So this kind of operations can be a solution for this contingency. We increase the amount of deliveries by 65%, which is a huge amount of increasing. Also, of course, we during one of those pilots, we use solar panels in order to connect or for the energy of the electrical vehicles. And of course, we reduce or produce savings in the fuel consumption. What happened after the implementation of these pilots was that companies actually realized that there was a feasible solution. So they start to talk with the owners of the parking lots, from different owners of the infrastructure in order to replicate the model. So this model has been replicated in Medellin, in other cities in Bogota. And one of the insights that we at the end has is that you can replace one truck for using 2 e-cargo trucks. But this is not general. This is not need to be generalized. We are not saying that we are going to replace the whole fleet of vehicles. This is under certain circumstances. For example, where you have flat terrain, high commercial densities, and the very last mile distribution. But we achieved the delivery of 80 packages per day. And with this, the first one is the collaborative model where companies share the cost of the infrastructure. We reduced by 30% the logistic cost. if we compare with the ones that are just down the two-ton truck, instead the electric bank and the three-wheel electric vehicles are just 16% of the reduction of the logistic cost. The difference is mainly regarded to the collaborative model, because in Bogota, for example, and the main cities, the use of the land is expensive. So in the more you can share the cost, the more you can improve your efficiency. So we have 4 considerations regarding the policy implication of our study for logistics, for cultural behaviors, for education, and for the regulatory framework. And for example, regarding the logistics, again, it's not just about the use of the vehicle. We have developed a model where we can evaluate where into the city is more feasible to implement collaborative nodes. So that companies can reduce the cost, can share the use of infrastructure, and we are not talking about create new infrastructure, we are talking about the use the one that is already available. Parking lots, shopping malls, public parkings, land transportation terminals, for example. From the regulatory framework point of view, it's important that their local authorities can promote the creation of urban logistics centers. They have some spaces, and we use a model in order to promote where into the city we can build these models. There is a discussion regarding the vehicle of the regulation of this vehicle is not that allowed, but it's not prohibitive. So we have to promote this technical and political discussion in order to allow the use of zero-emission vehicles for this operation. Of course, the charging infrastructure is also on the table for the discussion. And regarding cultural and education, we need to promote sensibilization campaigns, to develop programs for people, for the ones to build the vehicles, for the ones to build the logistic models, for promote more solutions, so more business solution based on green innovations. And I think that's it. I'm going to leave it like that. This is the partners that has been involved in this project for the last 5 years, 4 or 5 years. And thank you so much. Here you can watch the tool that we have developed in order to help the policymakers and companies to understand under which scenarios they can replace a combustion vehicle instead electric vehicle. It is in Spanish, so hope you can learn a little bit. And thank you so much.
So thank you for your presentation. It can be challenging to change culture, especially when it's in the private sector to change, but the results of your pilot are so compelling. Focusing on last mile distribution because of how high the percentage of the cost of distribution is important, but the 65% increase in the number of deliveries, the reduction in fuel consumption, I think many businesses would be motivated to partner with you. So our last 2 speakers come from Japan. Koichi Fujisaki has long been engaged in the field of transportation, tourism, land planning and rural development, as well as consumer policy as an official in the Japanese government from 1989 until his retirement from the Ministry of Land Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism, or MLIT, in June of 22. He served as the Vice Chair of Consumer Policy for the committee focused on that area in the early 2000s. He's also served as the lead individual preparing for the G7 transport ministers meetings. And so he brings a lot of experience to the conversation today. His colleague who is with him is Jun Kitada, who is a research fellow from the Japanese Transport and Tourism Research Institute He's a project manager for an international logistics company, and he's been doing that work since 2002. He has been exclusively in charge of carrying out improvements and management for efficient parts delivery to clients, manufacturing plants, and helping to develop new businesses and formulating new business plans in accordance with the parent company's management policies. So both of these individuals have a lot of experience in policy and research, and so we're very pleased to have them with us today. So please come join me.
Thank you, moderator. I'm Jun Kitada from JDTRI. Today, I'm here to talk to you about how can the logistics contribute to the circular economy. In this presentation, I will share the background, the method, the findings, and finally, policy implications to make logistics contribute to the circular economy. The Japanese government is committed to transitioning to a circular economy and to becoming carbon neutral by 2050. Accordingly, Japan's public and private sectors are collectively committed to the transition. Furthermore, the Economy Ministry has highlighted that the development of digital technology can play a key role in the transition. Then, how can the logistics sector contribute to the circular economy? Japan is well known for its high-quality logistics infrastructure, capacity, and service. However, the logistics industry still faces several issues, such as low loading efficiency of trucks, low labor productivity, and high delivery of shipments. Increasing the efficiency of the logistics sector can lead to reducing waste to contribute to the circular economy. On the other hand, there are no studies investigating how to increase the efficiency of logistics with the goal of reducing waste, as far as we know. Therefore, this study investigated how the logistics sector can reduce environmental deterioration by increasing this sector's efficiency. Our study used a combination of desk research, key informant interviews, and qualitative analysis. Let me present the findings of our study. We identified low productivity as the most important issue in Japan's logistics sector. We conducted an analysis of factors causing low productivity, referring to not only truck operators, but also other various modes of logistics operators. Then, we classified these factors from the perspective of finance, or KPI, operation, and architecture. From finance or KPI perspective, the main factors behind low productivity are, first, inefficiencies surrounding intermodal transportation, utilization of logistics assets, management of logistics function, administration, and business practice. Second, low loading rate. Third, low turnover rate. Fourth, low utilization of logistics assets. From operational perspective, the main factors are first, inability to plan and to efficiently allocate logistics resources based on demand. Second, lack of information sharing among companies. From architectural perspective, the main factors are first, problems with business practice, such as difficulty for shippers and logistics companies to tackle problem on an equal footing. Second, problems with unclear contracts. Third, low investment in IT. Fourth, delay in standardization related to logistics. Through expert opinion exchange and study of current development, we found several solutions. The first is joint logistics through asset sharing or consolidated transport across different industries. In regional logistics, each company individually arranges distribution bases and such dedicated facilities are enabled to handle cargo from multiple consignors. Joint logistics can be realized by utilization of systems such as milk run system, hub and spoke system. In trunk line logistics, long-distance transport is done alone. Such as result, return cargo can't be found. In terms of solutions, by addressing by plans of multiple shippers and sharing information between logistics companies, a joint transportation plan can be created. Pre-booking of necessary assets, such as trucks and logistics base, such as open cross-dock center, is another solution that can contribute to achieving joint logistics. Relay transportation is another solution. Additional solutions are information sharing, collaboration, and standardization of interface between logistics-related companies and system providers, standardization of documents, and standardization of packing style, such as pallets, cargo, carts. Additional solutions include digital transformation of supply chains and automation of logistics activities, which can address labor shortage in addition to low productivity. Here, we present possible policy implications. There are implications for taking and measures, as well as soft measures. Hard measures include the creation of rules requiring companies to collaborate for joint logistics and information sharing. Possible soft measures highlight the need by showcasing examples of companies that have benefited, develop a platform for information sharing, and finally, encourage companies to collaborate with each other to perform joint logistics. To promote standardization, digitization of supply chains, and automation of logistics activities, we refer to solutions similar to previous ones. In addition to regulatory measures, the government could adopt soft measures such as develop infrastructure and related guidelines. Standardization, digitization, and automation involve a huge cost. Therefore, for the initial phase, monetary assistance might help small and medium-sized companies. Thank you for your attention.
Okay. Well, thank you to our final presenters. As you can tell, today we were trying to dig a little deeper into the issues and showcase some of the pilots and examples from across the globe. I really appreciated the way that you framed the need for both the hard and the soft approach to encouraging these partnerships. And so thank you for sharing your perspective today. So we're now at the part of the presentation where we'd like to encourage questions from the audience. I do have some questions prepared, so I'm going to kick things off and return to Carolina, our first presenter. But please, if you have a question, raise your hand. I will be giving opportunities for folks to speak up. But before we do that, I'm intrigued to see who we have in the room with us today. So please, if you are a delegate or a member of a policy team, could you raise your hand, please? Do we have researchers in the room? Okay. And then I'm assuming that most of you are practitioners. Okay. So this is helpful as we think about our responses to these questions and the perspectives that you're coming from. So Carolina, so in your presentation, you were talking about this need for transformation. And can you really expand a little bit on the link between transportation development at the urban level and land use, and share a little bit more of how that works in practice?
Yes, I'll try. Do you mean the link between the initiative I was talking about?
The initiative and the fact that you brought together so many different stakeholders, different authorities, for those variety of perspectives to really bring about change.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think that the roadmap we studied really made a good job in trying to combine all sorts of voices and perspectives, even though it was a collaboration primarily among government institutions. They also conducted seminars and workshops to collect ideas and suggestions from, for instance, industry, research, practice, and so on. So I think they made a serious attempt really to reach further in combining different perspectives, which was very interesting because as a governance and policy researcher, we often talk about this. We end up in our different silos, and it is really challenging to reach across the silos. We are trained in specific fields of expertise. We don't always understand each other. We have different concepts and so on. We all know that. And I think the link between land use and transport planning is such a we have talked about that for ages, and we are very aware on a theoretical level, but I think it is really about getting together in practice and explore the links. I think also that all the very interesting cases that you have presented really demonstrates that in various ways. And for instance, as you were ending up with, the combination of hard and soft measures, that's also very much about what the state, the national level can do to provide incentives both for urban and regional planning actors, but also for business. So yeah, a bit vague answer maybe, but it's about creating the rules of the game to making this happen in practice.
And you talked about building trust. So beyond that, what were the most innovative aspects of the way that you brought these stakeholders together?
I think actually that this thing with spending time on building trust was one of the most important things, according to what the interviewee said. I didn't say something about the methodology, but this was based upon qualitative interviews with the officials who was involved in this initiative. So the building trust, spending time on really explaining to each other what is the challenging thing we are experiencing, which you can look upon a bit differently from different angles. That was one innovative thing that happened. And the other thing was really to get to that point of starting to talk about what needs to change, what needs to be taken away, what needs to be reduced, because it's easy to agree on additional measures, it's more difficult to challenge things and talk about leaving things behind and so on.
And so the work of CAF and moving to our second presentation, you're doing a lot to help ensure that decision makers make transportation logistics a priority, and also are trying to create these partnerships and provide resources. So, how can the work of ITF and CAF and other like-minded organizations really bring about significant change?
Well, thank you. This is a good question. I think almost everything has already been mentioned, but just to summarize, I would say first, awareness, raise awareness. We should be many more people in this hall. This is just one example. I think the second challenge is cooperation. You mentioned that, building trust, ending this silo mentality, not only among different departments and authorities, but also between public and private partners. They speak different languages. It needs to be built a common language. If not, there is no meaningful dialogue. There is no constructive process. And I think it can be helped by others, ITF, any development partner, etc. Third, data. Yesterday, CAF presented its urban observatory, which is extremely good. I would suggest everyone, would recommend everyone to have a look at it because it's very good. Unfortunately, urban freight is absent, and it's not CAF's fault. The problem is that data is not available. Data is difficult to gather. So more research on that needs to be done. And fourth, we need, and you mentioned that, scalability. Mm-hmm. We need to help to scale from pilot tests to full-scale implementation of projects. And this means that we need to build business cases that are long-term sustainable. It's not easy, but it's more easy to build a test pilot that launches for 1 year, 2 years, 3 months, whatever, in a small part of one city. But we need to imagine, and this is something development partners, organizations like ITF should help, is to help all of us, practitioners, authorities, etc., public, private sector, to build long-term business plans which are sustainable and help them and help us replicate, escalate these test models so as they can be sustainable for everyone in terms of environment, but in terms also of reasonable profitability from all actors.
If you allow me, I just wanted to add on that there was a word that was repeated in every presentation, that was collaboration. That is quite important, but it's not easy to do so in practice. So I think that it will be really helpful to embrace that issue and trying to set or trying to build mechanisms, formal mechanisms to do that, to facilitate that collaboration between the stakeholders, because as you told us, we have different languages we don't easily understand. And when we were on the ground trying to apply this methodology on the cities, one of the first things that surprised us is that even within the administration was not communication between the areas, different areas that were related to urban logistics, and for example, what was in that occasion was one of the first times that all together sat to talk about that, and they were doing many things, different things, sometimes contradictory things, and that's a good issue, but it has to be institutionalized, I think.
So I think collaboration was a recurring theme, but several of you touched on the need as well for government to have less of a restrictive approach, to mandate this behavior, but really a softer touch, to be a partner. And so I'm curious as to what you think we can do to not only foster the collaboration, but foster that environment where government and the private sector are truly working together and there's a willingness to come to the table.
Sure, that's an important stakeholder that has to be on the table, talking to. They are not the enemy for the administration, and for the private sector, the administration is not the enemy. And then we have to try to join forces in trying to engage, as Ignacio was saying, trying to work on pilots together, trying to make it possible, make it feasible, and trying to push on. We have, I mean, everyone has to give something and trying to improve the role of this. I don't know if you want to comment. That's right.
Well, and I think the pilot in Bogota and the results, like I said, are compelling, and so they certainly could encourage private partners. But what do you think are some of those drivers of collaboration?
Okay, yes. Talking about collaboration now, that's the main issue probably in this summit. Well, the main drivers, of course, are from the private side, the results, to minimize cost. From the public perspective, the use of the infrastructure, the common use of the infrastructure, and how you can maximize the use of these assets that you have that we usually don't, consider as an asset. The street, for instance, the illumination, things like that. We can share it more and take the most of that. And from the academia point of view, if you want, it's to escalate. You said it, and you as well, Daniel. It's not that we are tired to make pilots. They are more than welcome. It's the way, to fail fast and to learn fast as well. But we need to invest more in research, invest more in these pilots, and at the end, get the normative, framework in order to promote the escalation of these pilots to become a reality. Many things that probably it will take years. So that's probably the drivers, but also we need a kind of facilitators, if you want. Okay, when you think about collaboration, and you said it, Andres, it's not only about the goodwill of some bunch of people that are involved in a challenge. Collaborate also means a model of collaboration. Do you want to first collaborate in the internal parts, You want to collaborate vertically with your providers, with your clients, with the government, Or do you want to collaborate horizontally? Do you want to collaborate with your probably competitors, with your enemies, if you want, okay? But also, it's about metrics. You need to measure the collaboration. We need to understand that collaboration, again, is not the fancy word. It's about metrics, it's about a model, it's about goals that we need to share. So if you want to collaborate, you need to facilitate the conversation with these kind of tools. And at the end, and this is my final point, you need a place where you can trust, And sometimes it's not the associations because they represent some of the part. Sometimes it's not the government. Sometimes it's not the private. Sometimes we need to figure out where we can have neutral conversations when we leave, the discussions outside and we are going to start to collaborate. Sometimes it's a coffee, sometimes it's an organization, sometimes it's academia, things like that. We need to appreciate more these places where we can have neutral conversations. So that would be my final answer.
So I just have a couple of final questions for our last presenters before we'll open it up to the floor. But I'm curious, as we talk about collaboration, and you've heard from your colleagues, in the Japanese examples, who were the targets for the interviews? Who were you working with?
Thank you. Thank you for your question, moderator. Interviewees in our research include government agencies, industry groups, research institutions, logistics companies, and IT companies in Japan.
So I think that was something that you stressed that perhaps the others didn't touch on. It's not just about sharing data, but some of the IT infrastructure and investments to allow this collaboration and efficiency is important. So what specifically do you think are some of the steps that government could take to encourage that partnership?
Yeah, to realize the solutions proposed in our study, the government could take a combination of hard and soft measures. Hard measures, which include laws and regulations that require different stakeholders to share information, collaborate with each other, and follow standardization guidelines, could be taken. And soft measures such as providing monetary assistance through low interest rate loans or tax exemptions could promote the construction of convenient logistics centers such as open cross-dock centers. In addition, the government could assist by providing training and education, highlighting the needs and benefits of the proposed solutions.
And then the last thing I'm curious, we talked about last mile distribution, but your examples focused on trucking specifically. Why that aspect of freight movement?
Okay, because among the various transportation modes in Japan, land transportation, the majority of which is truck transportation, and warehouses account for nearly 80% of Japan's overall logistics cost. Furthermore, the regulations on working hours for truck drivers will become stricter in 2024. That's why improving the productivity of truck transportation is a top priority in Japan. However, our research has also analyzed the factors causing low productivity from the perspective of intermodal logistics across various modes such as railway, coastal shipping, forwarders, and third-party logistics.
Right, at this point, I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions. We can bring you a microphone. Oh, we have a question here in the center of the room.
My name is Kwon Jung Hwang from National Yanmin Jiao Tong University. I'm very happy to attend another research section. And my question is mainly for Cesar and Daniel. So we have seen that the achievement is very impressive and from the environmental aspect. And my question is more about the financial sustainability or the scalability mentioned, and or something to Ignatius mentioned, how to build out the business case. So can you share with us a little bit more about how you create the business environment or ecosystem that the business can sustain, and then that we can learn from this case and apply to other cities? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for your question. Well, as Cesar was mentioned, the first thing was to create a neutral environment. I just think if you go to a company and you tell them you can replace one truck instead two e-cargo trucks, the first time we did that, they just tell us you're crazy, you're just no. So you have to start a process where you involve him into how to bring sustainable impacts with your operation to society, to the community. But companies also need to be efficient, need to be profitable, need to achieve their goals, okay? So the first thing is involve the whole actors. And there are not just the companies, but what happened with the ones who build the vehicles, what happened with the ones who provide technology, what happened with the government or the local municipalities. all of them, what we did was integrate, articulate their needs. What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? Where do you want to go? Which was something what we were mentioning. We need to culture and the trust need culture. The trust need that you can say what are your main objectives, where do you want to go, and what information can I share with you. And I'm not going to do anything with the information that is not going to benefit to everyone who is involved in. So articulation of the actors, building trust, share information, and it's also important to have a strong technical background in order to understand what models should we use, what vehicles can we implement, how to measure the information, and how to use the information to facilitate the decision makers in order to understand whether or not you can escalate the solutions. There are some scenarios under which those vehicles, we found that we cannot escalate them. So that's why we use the data, the information, in order to have projections about how can solutions be useful, feasible in a long term.
Yes, sure.
Sorry. I'm not going to repeat this. I'm just going to say that usually in this kind of projects, regarding your question about engage, the private side, particularly the business and the business model, you always are going to have leaders and followers. The leaders are one, followers are a million. You need always to find at least one or two of them involved from the beginning in the project. I'm talking about the leader. And the leader is the one that he is not waiting for the figures to go green, He's not waiting for the case to work for them. They are going just to take the risk and buy more tricycles, They're going to invest in infrastructure and they are not going to need the, objective point of view in order to take the decision. They are just going to jump. And what happens in this project was that the followers starts to appear. And then when you have many people involved, of course, the numbers goes green. The numbers is going to work for many people because you are starting a value network. And that makes sense for all of them. So I'm just going to finalize saying that try to look always for a leader, for people who is going to take the risk from the beginning of the project. In our case, it was a food company called Nutresa in Colombia.
Did you want to add something?
May I add something? Because I think you are touching the key issue. The key issue is how we move from test pilots to full-scale, citywide changes. Making things different involves winners and losers, involves costs. One of the challenges is that in many cases, too often, regulators, authorities in cities are not familiar with the operations and the costs involved in how the urban logistics system works, so that they are unaware of who are the winners, who are the losers, and where are the costs, and if they are bought by whom. So that's a big challenge. And my impression, not from South America, now from Europe, is that we have spent millions euros, dozens millions euros in pilot tests in everywhere. And when public money has stopped, the pilot has dropped because no one had thought, when after public money, how this project can be sustained. And that's I think that's the key issue, because we see in Europe, but I think everywhere, we see too many test pilots, but too little cities where these test pilots go beyond and are full scale, are applied in a substantial, if not everywhere in the city, because cities, there is a downtown, so cities, it cannot be a scale at the same everywhere in the city, but have a full scale. For me, that's the key issue now.
I think we had another question, perhaps over here.
Thank you very much. Henrik Gudmundsen from Climate Think Tank in Denmark. I just first wanted to thank the research organizations for bringing together these very interesting examples from around the world, addressing similar problems that we all share, but from different perspectives. This is really interesting and valuable. And thank you also for providing so much honest evidence about what has happened and what was results. I was actually going to ask CAF, as you're a bank, I suppose you're interested in there will be some kind of return on investment at some point. You're not a charity. And from your point of view, what are the bankable elements of some of these projects? But then very much thank you to the colleagues from Bogota for actually bringing forward evidence on things, even on climate and economics. This kind of evaluation, we're not used to have that. So very much credit to you for doing that. There are still questions about, obviously, the business case here, and maybe back to the bank again. What from your perspective, are there some promising lending mechanisms that could help so you don't see projects collapsing after public money are gone? Is there a role for a bank for maybe a longer term perspective or some other financial mechanisms? And then the other question was, it's very interesting with the trust, of course, but can you actually scale trust? I mean, do you need to be part of the project to see the light? Can you actually scale projects that are based on trust? I think that would be an interesting research question. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, us as development bank, we can offer two kinds of products to our clients that are the country members in our region. So one is this kind of technical assistance, and to help them to build a framework, a regulatory and normative framework, and to help the administration to deploy public policy and going forward to this process of continuous improvement. But that's one part of it, and the other part is we lend money as well. We're trying to lend money, and we try every day to figure out and to search for new instruments, new elements that can be put into the equation to make more sustainable the projects, to make them sustainable. As Ignacio was saying, that's the key issue. We don't have public money, but sometimes it is needed to start up the pilots. However, the main goal is to achieve that sustainability in time. So we have some independent on who's going to be the lender. We have some instruments that can be applied on that. We have the advantage that we can lend to the private and the public sector within the same bank, but we have to address the projects in a different ways in each case. So yeah, we have a number of instruments that we can offer in that, but always trying to make sustainable the projects and the interventions that we do.
So our time together is limited. We have just a few more moments, but this idea of how do we scale trust, do you want to address that, Carolina?
Thank you. That was specifically the question. Thank you so much for the question, Henrik Gudmundsen. As I think of it, it's important to think about in what specific moments of an innovative process that trust is important. I think maybe what we are talking about, or what we have seen in our case study, was that trust was very important in specific critical moments of starting to rethink things and explore new pathways. Then maybe it's more the final frameworks that you can scale, perhaps. So that's my perspective on that. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank our panel for being with us today. I do want to also thank the organizations that made this research spotlight possible. It's been a great discussion, great conversation. I think we all have work to do. This, as I said earlier, was, I think, the only session on freight and logistics at this conference. And given the impact on quality of life associated with the movement of freight, both because of the emissions and the air quality impacts, as well as how it impacts access to affordable goods, access to jobs, as well as a more efficient system can bring down the level of congestion on our overall network, which makes it easier for everyone to move and travel. And so we really do need to continue to emphasize the need to address every aspect of the use of our system and how critical freight and logistics are as we work with our policymakers. So thank you for the examples that you shared. There's definitely some compelling data and information that we can use. I do think we also have a unique opportunity. During the pandemic, as was mentioned, for the first time, the public started to understand the importance of freight. Supply chain is now something that average citizens talk about, where perhaps before they didn't understand what that was. So in terms of encouraging change, we perhaps have a unique moment with, at this point in the recovery from the pandemic, a change in attitudes, maybe more appreciation of why this work is important. So thank you to each of you for the work that you're doing and your contributions, and most importantly, thank you for joining us today. Please join me one more time in thanking the panel.